attracting and engaging a new generation of wine enthusiasts to your brand. And it's going to be moderated by Jennifer Warrington from the Wise Academy. And just briefly, a little bit about her. She has 23 years experience in the wine industry, including 13 with Wise. She began her career in the wine industry working for Leslie Berglund, who is the co-founder and chairman of Wise at Ambrosia Wine Catalog and the Wine Tasting Network, shortly after completing her BA in English literature. I wish I had gotten an English degree. Actually, I like to read so much more now. But anyway, so she will be leading a panel with her fellow panelists here, and I will turn over to her.
Thanks, Sam. I wonder how many of you sell out all your wine each vintage? And I wonder how many of you worry about the economy and visitor traffic this year? And I wonder how many of you really, really understand how Gen Zs think? Because I want to know. As Sam mentioned, my name is Jen. I'm with the with WISE, stands for Wine Industry Sales Education. We're out of California, but we work with wineries all across the states, Canada. We're working with wineries in actually Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa this year. So pretty excited about that. But enough about me. I have a panel of experts here, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. I'll start with the one that's here, and then we'll go to the other ones, the boys that are online. So Maiah, if you could introduce yourself and let us know what you do.
My name is Maiah Johnson-Dunn, and I am the Beverage Education Manager over at New York Kitchen in Canandaigua Lake. I'm also a wine writer who has trouble finding words apparently this morning. I'm very happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. And Chris?
Hi, my name is Chris Bitter, and I'm a wine economist. I'm currently with Terrain, which is the market research and economics arm of American Ag Credit and several other large farm credit associations. So we make a lot of loans to wineries. And prior to that, I had my own company, Vintage Economics, doing consulting and market research for the wine industry. I'm very happy to be here as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. And Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben Salisbury. I'm the founder and president of the Salisbury Creative Group. We specialize in sales and marketing strategy consulting for wineries and craft distilleries. This spring, I'm coming to the end of my 39th year in the business. I spent most of my career in sales roles, executive sales roles for big companies like Constellation Brands and St. Michel White Estates. I'm really happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. All right, let's get down to it. So I'm going to start with you, Chris, and if you could set it up for us and let us know what's the real state of the wine industry right now? Like, why are we even talking about this Gen Z and attracting new people?
Sure. So one thing that we've probably all seen, people in their own businesses, is the boomers have really been the drivers of growth of wine consumption over the last several decades. So they love wine. They've been into wine, they buy wine, they're wine club members, but they're reaching their 60s and 70s now, and their numbers are starting to decline. So over the next 10 years, we're expected to lose 1 in 5 boomers as they age, and those that are still around are going to be in their 70s and 80s. So we can't count on the boomers to continue to drive wine demand. So wine hasn't performed quite as well with the younger generations, and particularly non-white consumers. So the younger generations themselves are much more diverse than the older generations. So this impending decline in boomer wine spending is going to be a challenge for wineries. And I have just a couple of slides to put some data and numbers behind these points. Did we get advance one? So the first slide, and it looks like my titles didn't show up here, and the title of the slide, but the first slide here shows wine's market penetration by generation. So this is based on micro data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey. And as you can see here, this is the share of total beverage alcohol spending that's devoted to wine for each generation. You can see that the older generations wine captures a much greater share of spending from the older generations than the younger generations. So I will say that this has probably always been the case. Part of this is just related to age, but in also, I see the younger generations are still making progress, but this progress hasn't been as fast as hoped for, and we can't take continued progress for granted. So Gen Z and the Millennials are different from the older generations in many ways, and they have a lot more beverage alcohol options today, such as RTDs and hard seltzers, craft beer, than the older generations did at this stage in their life. So we can't take it for granted that we're going to see them progress to the same level where we see the older generations today. Now let's go to the next slide. Now this slide shows annual wine expenditures per household by racial ethnic group. And this, you can see here, non-Hispanic whites households generate about 2.5 times the spending on wine than non-white households. So that's a huge differential. And part of this has been due in the past to lower incomes in educational attainment, overall. But even if we control for these factors, we find that non-Hispanic whites spend a lot more on wine than other racial ethnic groups. So that's an important fact too. And then the final slide kind of illustrates why this is important.
I'm sorry, can we ask Chris to clarify that last slide?
I'm sorry?
Chris, can you clarify that last slide? Because is it really saying that?
Can you clarify this last slide saying in terms of the annual spend here?
Yes. So this is based on the consumer expenditures data. This is reported expenditures on wine per household, and it shows the reported amount that's spent on an annual basis by each racial ethnic group.
But is that literally $200 to $250 for non-Hispanic white spending per year?
That is correct. And this is a survey. And in most surveys, people underreport their alcohol spending. So I would view these as a low-end estimate. So this is actual data, but it's probably underrepresents the actual dollar amounts. So I focus more on the differentials between the groups as opposed to the actual dollars. That help?
So the net is focus more on the differentials, not the dollar amount. Okay.
Okay, final slide. And why that's so important, this last slide shows the racial ethnic composition by generation. And as you can see, the older generations were much less diverse than the younger generations. So the boomers and silent generation are about 75% non-Hispanic white. If we go down to Gen Z is kind of 50-50 white versus non-white persons. So it's a much more diverse younger generation that we have to attract here. So I think from these slides, you can see the challenge is clear. Wineries are going to have to figure out how to connect with these diverse younger generations if they're going to continue to thrive. So that's the topic that we'll be talking about more in this session.
Thanks, Chris. So in terms of the demographics, could it be argued also that it's the amount of money that these households have? Whites making more than Blacks or Hispanics, or the older generations having more expendable funds than younger generations?
Mm-hmm. That is clearly the case. But as I mentioned with the racial ethnic spending by racial ethnic group, even if we control for those differences in incomes and educational attainment, which is actually almost important in determining whether somebody drinks wine or how much they spend on wine, even if we control for those differentials or those differences, there are still differentials in spending that are pretty significant across these groups. And it is the same thing with age. And as I mentioned too, generally, the younger generations or younger people have always spent less on wine. And that's partly because they have less resources, but it's also because they have a preference for other beverages.
Right, thank you. I'm going to give about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So if you have questions, please note them down and we'll have time for that. But if it's burning and you absolutely need to know right now, that's fine too. It's no rules. So I'm going to go to you, Maiah. What are ways that we can counter these trends? Like, what can businesses do? What are you doing to attract new audiences?
So that slide is interesting with the numbers, because I don't think it takes into account the potential spending power of everybody who's not white. And, you know, I think we've seen figures, I believe it was written in VinePair, that Black Americans have like a 1.2 trillion spending power within the beverage industry. Part of the issue is that we're just not marketing to them appropriately. We are very set in our ways. And, you know, for the work that I do over at New York Kitchen, I think that, you know, the way it used to be or the way that it's always been is a cuss word. Like, I'm over it. So I have been overhauling our educational programming to the extreme, and it's been a lot of fun. We're no longer just talking about wine tasting notes, but we're also talking about diversity in wine. And we're seeing a lot of different people come out, and our audience totally shift. So I think that what we're missing is opening up the market to more people who need to be there.
Thank you. And Ben, can you tell us how marketing plays a role with wineries and the wineries that you're working with, or other beverage companies?
Yes, you know, so much of the messaging that is coming from wineries, and I really don't like to generalize for the whole industry, but it's kind of hard not to. The industry as a whole has tended to be condescending to people and, you know, consumers. It's like, you can't really enjoy this beverage fully unless you attain a certain level of education. And I think that that's a big part of the barrier here. You know, not everybody wants to invest that much emotionally and time-wise to learn the beverage. When it comes to marketing messaging, I think the three big takeaways are, you know, more wine education is not necessarily going to solve the problem. Also, using a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what you see a lot of, that's not going to cut it either. And another important message or takeaway on messaging is, if the one, you know, who is the hero of your story? So when you're telling your story on your website, in your social media feeds, and in your email marketing, who's the hero of the story? If the hero is your brand and your product, you're going to lose a lot of people. I love this quote from the founder of Archer Roos. She said that we're going to tell you stories, but it's going to be about you. We're going to tell you stories about your life and how our product may or may not fit into it. I just think that's one of the most brilliant takeaways when it comes to messaging and marketing around this issue, whether it's to younger generations or underserved groups. The wine industry has a lot of work to do around the messaging. And I do have some humorous slides to share, but I don't know if this is the right time to do them or not. We can come back to that. But anyway, just a few talking points about the messaging and how messaging is a big way out of this box that we've put ourselves in. And just one other quick thing. Ever since the article came out from Silicon Valley Bank about this issue, there's been no shortage of articles written and videos, et cetera, on the topic. And one of the things that really cracks me up is people saying, well, you know, make sure you mention that you're doing this from a sustainable standpoint, or make sure you're doing, you know, this. And my thought here is, if it's not authentic, if it's not really part of who you are and why you do it, people are going to see right through that messaging. So authenticity is a really big part of the messaging when it comes to communicating what you're doing, what your values are, and what you care about. It's got to be real. It's got to be authentic. It has to be why you exist, not just a marketing message.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, absolutely. When we do mystery shopping at Wise, I've probably got 6,000 data points. So 6,000 mystery shops we've done over the years. And one of the things that comes up often is that storytelling, and it's not being told, or if it is, it's very much facts and not a story. So if we could create a story that has an authentic reflection of who we are, it's going to resonate with every generation type. So that's definitely something to consider. Thank you. So along those lines, how are we breaking down the barriers? How can we do this? Maiah, I'm going to go back to you for that.
You know, it's specific to the work I'm doing at New York Kitchen. Like I said before, it's really about just kind of starting fresh and opening up new opportunities for learning to new people in different ways. So like I said, we kind of brought in some different educational programming opportunities for different people. But we also are focused on making sure that that carries through in other places where you experience our brand. So you go into the tasting room and you might have a similar experience. And it's all about making the product more tactile for people so that they can experience and better understand it. And we talked a little bit when you and I connected about some others who are kind of doing that from the jump. And so forgive me if I'm jumping ahead in your
No,
questions,
no.
but I just find myself so impressed by people like Yannick Benjamin, who created Contento. And he said something like there are only 20% within the disabled community who are financially stable. And that's literally because they do not have work that will accommodate them. So he built the restaurant that they can work in. And, you know, obviously that takes real forethought and commitment to making these changes, but you also see him just killing the game every day. So clearly it also works, and the food is supposed to be delicious. So I think that we need to kind of shift our lens a little bit, thinking about how we can make the space more accessible to people in different ways. And that might be physical. It might be literally providing the educational opportunities that they need. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in this panel, to make sure that you get people in there that are different, breathing fresh air into the space, and therefore encouraging other people to come in.
Right. And Ben, you'd mentioned something about luxury and how we define luxury. I thought that was a great point that you'd brought up.
Yeah, the word luxury and with regards to wine has typically meant a certain thing, right? Special occasion, need to be educated. It's almost a strange reverence paid to this product that has to be treated a certain way, served at a certain temperature, the bottle held at a certain angle when you open it at the table. This kind of stuff is a huge turnoff to the younger generations. You know what? You know how the younger generation defines luxury in this category? Convenience and fun. And if you really want to get into the minds of the young people and how they may or may not consume wine, it's all about occasions. So being able to put a can of Pinot Noir in your backpack when you're climbing a 14,000-foot peak in Colorado because you plan to pop it at the top, that is the ultimate luxury for this generation. And if you think they give a flip what temperature that product is when they crack the can, they do not. So all this education about what the proper temperature to serve things and the angle to hold the bottle when you're pulling the cork, it's just a huge part of the problem.
So it's definitely part and parcel of that experience. That's what the industry is. It's an experience. People want to experience wine. So in order to make it more approachable for everyone, it's all about that experience. So
Can I add?
yeah, you anytime.
Please. Sorry to jump in.
No,
I think that's an interesting point, Ben, definitely. And what I notice in my classes at New York Kitchen, though, is that the younger consumers are actually really curious what temperature to drink their wine at, or why rosé looks the way that it does. They just don't have anybody that's talking to them in a language that makes sense. So I think that people are actually quite hungry for knowledge. They just need it in a way that's a little bit more relatable.
And I think a good place to start is to think about occasions. We don't necessarily market to or communicate the ways that the wine can be enjoyed in various settings. This is why canned wine to me is just such an incredible opportunity. There are a lot of wineries who make traditional 750 cork finish wines, but they also make those same products available in a can. And I think that, having more of that would be a huge step in the right direction.
So Ben, can you give us a little more insight on what kind of messaging could be or potentially changed or tweaked on websites, social posts, that kind of thing, ads, email marketing?
Yeah, and I have some slides. I was planning to be there in person and I'm not, and now I'm struggling to get my slides up. But if I get my slide up, a picture tells 1,000 words. So I'll describe this. When it comes to these occasions and the marketing, the messaging around it, a good place to start is having the customer be the hero of the story, not your product. And so if the customer is the hero of the story and you're looking at the occasions in your messaging, in your social media posts, for example, you can show pictures of people enjoying your product in the occasions that's important to them. And again, I have, let me try. I'm trying to share my screen. Oh, good. Here we go. The wonder of technology. Let's see. If
Ask and you shall receive.
yeah. What are you all seeing? I'm hoping you're seeing pictures of people
Yes.
enjoying
Yep.
wine.
We see your pictures. Awesome.
Yeah, so this is my little collage of what the industry has done to destroy the relationship with younger consumers or anyone who's outside of the industry. You're only welcome when you can master certain things. I absolutely hate this type of education when it comes to reaching new consumers because, while it is a good point that there's curiosity and they want education, does it have to be so stiff and formal? Does it have to be so, unwelcoming, I guess? I want to share with you some of the messaging. Is it okay to drink wine out of a box? Yes. Is it okay to drink wine out of a can? Yes. In fact, sometimes that's the only way you're going to get to consume it, where a glass is not, allowed. This is an example of messaging. Here's an occasion-based, drinking wine in a hot tub on the deck of a boat, having your box delivered by drone. I love to show examples of this messaging. What are you going to drink on your wakeboard? Well, a can of wine would work just fine, but a bottle wouldn't. Lots of brands are producing their regular mainline wine, but also in cans as well. So I think, and this is along education, I'd rather see this kind of education, like how many bottles of wine does 12 cans equal? Well, how long will it last? What's inside of it? So these are, I think, good examples of the kind of messaging that anyone is capable of doing. If the customer is the hero of the story and not your brand.
I think that's, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna.
I think that's super cool to see, Ben, and appreciate you sharing that. And then I spent some time talking with a friend of mine, Alex Jankowski over at Wagner Vineyards, about sort of what they're doing to combat this as well. And I don't have beautiful examples. I just have a story. So forgive me, the writer words. Alex runs Wagner's social media account, pays really close attention to who is tagging him or tagging the brand rather, and the content that they're creating. So he discovered this group called Instinct. They're a group of Black women who live in upstate New York and love the luxury, because that's what it is, of tasting wine in the Finger Lakes. I mean, if you've been on these streets, they're wonderful. So Alex noticed that they were creating educational content for people that looked like them. So he reached out to them, and they were always going to Wagner specifically. They were going there, taking these videos and posting them. So he reached out to them and said, there's got to be a way for us to partner. And what I love about this is that I already know, I led a panel at FL Excursion about social media, and everybody swarmed the stage after saying, we don't have time for this. So what I love about this story from Alex is that he reached out to somebody who was already doing the work and said, how can we partner to create some content that is mutually beneficial? He didn't give them a script, and I think that's super important. He said, let's create content that is mutually beneficial. It's coming from your voice, but it's detailing, X, Y, and Z about Riesling or X, Y, and Z about hybrid grapes. And then let's put that forward. And he really also wanted to be on TikTok, didn't necessarily want to add that to his workload. I can understand. They were all over TikTok. So two birds, one stone, right? And they're creating suddenly this really cool and engaging content that is going to their audience share, the majority of which are people of color and also women. And it's marketing to them in these sort of really dynamic and cool ways that you showed in your examples. And so I think, looking to partner with people who can create compelling content, especially video content, because what we're seeing now is that people don't quite have the attention spans, or, maybe you look at a photo and I don't know about you, but that leaves my brain like 5 minutes later. But if I see a really compelling video, I'm going to remember that girl said that Riesling tastes like X because of Y. So perhaps it's worth also digging into that to educate our consumers a little bit more. Vinstinct?
The Instagram is Vinstinct. So I know most of us, we have a job title and we just do one thing, right? Like we don't wear multiple hats or anything. Yeah, right?
Yeah, no.
Multiple hats, all of us, doesn't matter what size of the winery, but the smaller, the more hats it seems like. So I love the idea of being able to partner with somebody to be able to do some of these things. So it's not all on us for everything. So that's a one great way of thinking through your marketing. I wanted to go back to Ben and your RTD, and Chris, maybe you have some insights. if you're not doing ready to drink, or your brand is like, absolutely, we just don't want to do anything like that, are there ways that we can be more approachable to a younger generation without doing the ready to drink? This is coming, like, I didn't prep them for this question, so.
Yeah, although I don't want to minimize the opportunity for ready to drink. It's the functionality is there, the capability is there. No matter how small your winery is, you can put your wine in a can. So to me, that would be the first thing I would do if I owned a winery. But there's other things too. Box wines, wine on tap might be the most accessible. So if you're really averse to putting your wine in a can, and by the way, I spent 12 years at St. Michel Wine Estates, and that whole time Ted Basler was our president. And he said we would put screw caps on our wines over his dead body. I mean, he was really adamant about not doing anything that wasn't traditional. And there's a lot of that in the industry. And for those of you in the audience, I can't see your faces. I can't see you nodding, but you know who you are. But wine on tap is a safe bridge to an alternative way. And people who are selling wine on tap can put it in a growler. You can put it in your You can put it in your Yeti if you want. So I think that's a fun way to kind of get started down this road. Just a practical tip. But just as you're telling the story about your wines and you're making it accessible, people want to see visuals of other people enjoying the wine. And even if it's drinking out of a plastic stemless glass would be better than, holding your wine at a certain angle so you could accurately discern the color.
And I would say, one very simple thing that you could do, and I think the younger generations appreciate and don't, have issues with is just a screw cap. If we just want to make wine more convenient, a lot of the wines we make don't need to have a cork in them. And that's one simple way. And you could take that bottle up to the mountain, and even if you don't have a bottle opener, you can unscrew it and you can drink the wine. So I think there are some simpler ways to make the wine more appealing and convenient for younger folks.
Right, thank you. It takes a lot of research and energy to create a new brand, or not necessarily a new brand, but to do something like a RTD or change things up. So while that is an awesome, easy way to do things, I mean, easy enough to say, it might not be easy enough to do. So let's also think about how we can really think about how we're positioning our brand and the things that we can be doing to make sure that we're reaching all the audiences we can. Now, I want it to be authentic too, because if you're reaching out to, a younger generation because it's the hip thing to do, but your brand isn't hip, then we got some thinking to do. There's ways to make it more approachable, absolutely. But if you think about your brand being your North Star, what are the things that keep you going in that direction that you can do that would be more approachable for a younger audience, right? So I'm saying it's a yes and game, right? So just because Ben is all over and rightly so, there's a great opportunity there, but there's also opportunity for us to make small changes that'll make a huge impact. So how accessible and what kind of pictures do you have on your website? What is it? Are they people? Because that's what people like to see, is other people enjoying it. And are they people of different races and backgrounds? Are they doing different things? I mean, that's the smallest thing you might want to look at, but just thinking through those things is going to be just as important and impactful and long-term. Making sure there's nothing to add. Okay.
And I have a great example of this if you have a second. For
you, Ben, yes.
This, along the lines of, it has to be authentic. It has to be really you. And this is something you have to, is a hill to die on for you. I love this example of Shannon Family of Wines. They have 1,000 sheep that they use to, take care of the weed control, et cetera. When they say they're sustainable, organic, regenerative, they mean it. They live it. They put their money where their mouth is, and they do a good job of talking about this in their messaging on their website and their social media. So it's easy to be authentic when you really believe in this stuff and are really doing it. So I think it's good to point to examples of people who are doing this well. And I just love this example. They get into exactly what they're doing on their ranch to live the values that they espouse.
Great. Tablas Creek out of Paso Robles in California is doing an amazing job with their marketing of their wine in a box. They just tried it and it went gangbusters on them. So I think in Washington State, Goose Ridge does a great job with growlers and ciders and things in cans. They're doing a great job. I'm seeing it all over the wine industry. So some interesting programs in terms of how you can set up wine clubs slightly differently for those kinds of vehicles too is something to consider. So Chris, based on the younger generations, what do you think can be done? We had a conversation and you were saying something about disarming the visitors in the tasting room or appeal to the audience. Can you expand on that for us?
I would say, for many wineries in this room, I'm assuming that DTC is probably your heaviest channel, and the first point of contact with most of the customers and eventual club members you're going to get is in the tasting room. And I think it's really important, if you want to cultivate these younger consumers, is to make them feel comfortable when they come into the tasting room. So, one easy thing to do is things like don't be explicitly correcting pronunciation and in making people feel like they don't understand wine and it shouldn't be there. So just a more casual approach, recognizing that these younger generations may not have that much experience with wine in the past. They might come from a background where their parents didn't drink wine, so they have no experience. So it's just trying to disarm them, make them feel comfortable, and use simple terminology that they can understand to help them to understand the whole wine experience and why it's so interesting and why they should be continuing along this learning path, but recognizing that they're at the beginning of that journey. So I think that's one of the key things is making sure that tasting room experience is appropriate to this younger generation that you want to attract.
I hear a lot from the wineries that we work with when they offer things like games, bocce, or other, the beanbag one. Cornhole, thank you. I'm showing my age. But different things like that, which is great and it attracts a younger demographic. But at the end of the day, our business is to sell wine. So what are we doing with our staff and the way we've got things set up to make sure that, yes, they're enjoying themselves, but they're buying wine? Right? It's one thing to offer a great experience. It's another thing to sell wine. So I sometimes see that as a big struggle because you want to attract them, but they're only there to have a good time and then they leave. So what are things we can be doing? Right? So some of it is, yes, training our staff. Some of it is that education for the people coming in. That's a younger demographic to be able to understand how they can, it could be a Tuesday night wine, making it accessible to them, talking to them in different ways, talking about wine clubs or subscription. They might not want that traditional wine club. Do we have a subscription program where they can just buy wine when they want, how they want it? That's becoming more and more popular. So what are ways that we can make it more attractive to people with that experience? And it's a yes and thing. So I'm planting that seed and want to come back to that, but it's going to be even more and more important, I think.
Could I make one more point, which would be, we haven't talked about the types of wines that you're offering, but also recognize that these younger generations generally don't have the kind of financial resources. So it's important to have some gateway wines, wines that would appeal to that kind of palate and would be on the less expensive end of what you might normally have on your wine list. And that's one way that you can convert these consumers who are coming into the tasting room to buyers. If you can offer something that they see there's a value in and something that they can afford.
Right. Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, I do. I love this topic of, how do we sell more? Because there's a misconception, I think, about what selling really is. It tends to be way too transactional. Look at it this way. A sale should be a byproduct of a much larger relationship. The sales should be a natural outgrowth of this relationship you're building. So if you focus on building high quality, authentic relationships, you'll sell all the wine you could possibly want to sell. Think of it as a customer journey. First, they don't know about you, then they become familiar. Maybe they visit the winery. If you're not always trying to sell them something, but instead building a relationship, you will sell plenty of it down the road. This is why I love email marketing so much. I think of getting someone to join your email list as a micro conversion along the road to selling a lot. Get them onto your email list. Your job for the day is done. Then you can use expert email marketing to highly segment your list and build a relationship over time. I interact with a lot of winery owners, and I see them making the mistake of everything is just too transactional. The buy now button comes out way too early in the relationship. It needs to follow on later. Work on building authentic relationships, putting the customer as the hero of the story. The sales will naturally flow.
Yeah, we like to say that sales is an extension of great hospitality. If you go somewhere and like any other retail or anywhere else, and you are interested in something and they help you, understand and help you decide what you're going to buy, and then they just walk away, that would be weird and awkward. That's almost what we're doing in a tasting room, if you will.
Yeah.
It's just, we're there to be matchmakers. The idea is they're there to buy, and our job is to figure out what's within our portfolio of things that we can offer. What's the right match for that particular person, right? What's the right wines, the right wine club, the right things that are going to be most of interest to them, and match it. So it's an extension of great hospitality. So it's not just pushing, because that's not what we're here to say or do. That isn't sales. That's not what we're talking about. That's a whole different kind of sales, but an extension of great hospitality. It's all in that, making those connections. It's a relationship. That's what we're all about, is relationship building. So collecting that contact data is hugely important. Like Ben was saying, it would be almost like having a first date and not collecting contact data. If you don't collect their data, that's a whole bunch of one night stands, and that's a whole different thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about building relationships. We're talking about commitment long term. So hugely interesting. I'm seeing a big peak in text messaging is huge with wineries. And so incorporating that is a great way to reach that younger demographic as well, because they're less likely to read an email as they are a text message from a winery or a place that they like and respect. That's one way to reach. Did you have something to?
Yeah, I think I'm relieved in some ways to hear the yes and relieved in some ways to hear the term gateway wines, because I think I got a little bit worried that we might be telling people to just put your wine in a can and then don't do anything else to attract your customers or keep them here. And that's not going to save your brand when all those old people die. So I think it's important, if that's how you're going to capture your audience, that's totally fine. But I think it's also important to then do the yes and not fully dumb down the conversation. Just because they're younger doesn't mean they don't want to learn, or because they look different doesn't mean they don't want to learn. They just need to learn in a different way. And then I think, like you were saying, it's really about dating this person. And as they grow, you grow with them. And then they start to buy, the $20 bottle. And then all of a sudden they're buying the $50. My husband said to me last night, I accidentally bought a $500 bottle. I'm like, what are you doing? But here's the thing. It happens as you start to spend time learning about wine. And if you're only going to talk to people about cans, then I promise you they will never buy that $500 bottle one day. So you have to use the gateway to your benefit to get to the audience that you need. And I love even the relationship building thing, because you can think about it as simple as, I'm renovating a house right now. I'm not necessarily looking at the cheapest quote. I'm looking at the person that gives me the best vibes. And that's what everybody kind of wants when they spend their day out tasting. So I feel like, we get in these conversations and it starts to feel heavy and overwhelming. And then when you think about it in the term of the scope of life in general, then it's really quite easy, right? This is about good vibes and educating folks so that they stay your friend and keep buying your wine. And then we talked about, you mentioned staff. So
Yes, I was just going to nudge you with that.
just going to keep it going. So I'm really inspired by Young Lion out in Canandaigua. This is a brewery, so I know that we are here to talk about wine, but I think that we have something to learn from
Takes a
them.
lot of good beer to make an excellent wine, I
Sure
hear.
does. So, 2020 happened, George Floyd, the whole thing, and all of a sudden everybody was trying to hire as many Black people as they can. And what Young Lion realized is just because you bring them into your environment doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out without the proper education. So they were bringing people in, this is great. And then those people were leaving and having an awful time and it was feeling bad. So what Jen, the owner of Young Lion, decided to do was create an internship program and train these people over the course of a couple months, helped them understand what beer truly is, how it's made, why it's cool, help them love it. And then that gave them ownership to want to sell it. So again, there's real effort in that work to get people on board to want to do this work. But once it's done, you've got a super fan who looks nothing like your entire employee base, who's going to bring all their friends that look like them to enjoy this product too. So I think, I guess I'm just saying that it's worth it to educate people in order to get to those next steps to expand your audience. And I think it's, the best ambassador you will have will be the staff person that fully understands your product and loves it. So that feels like a worthy place to spend your time.
Yes, definitely. Education is near and dear to my heart, but Ben, I also know you have strong feelings around this. So tell me, we were talking about wine education versus building a story. So do you want to give us some insights on that?
Yeah, and I'm really resonating with Maia's comment about it not being either or, it's both and I think that's really important to keep in mind. I tend to be a very polarizing person, and I don't mean to be so definitive about that. I think
I hope you don't mind my poking you.
No, this is what makes a great panel discussion, I think. But I do think the industry has gone too far in some ways in the way education works, So education that's sincere and really useful and helpful and authentic is great. But the minute it starts to smell elite, like there's too much reverence associated with the process of making wine, drinking wine, etc. You don't find this in Europe. In Europe, there are much more, wine isn't a special beverage that you only pull out on special occasions. It's part of everyday life. And so I think there's some good lessons in that. I'm all for education. I'm just that way myself. When I want to learn about something, no matter what it is, I want to go deep and learn. That helps me improve the enjoyment. That's not just for wine, it's for all kinds of life experiences and products. But I think that the one size fits all approach, as if everyone is going for their Master of Wine certification, I think that's a missed opportunity. You need to know your customer base and segment them properly so that you can provide the type of education that particular group wants. For some people, it's just some basic functionality so I can pick a good wine at a good price and move on with my life. For others, they want to go much deeper. So you have to be able to serve all of those different audiences. And so I think that would be a key takeaway from today's discussion is don't use a one size fits all approach when it comes to wine education. Don't assume that everybody wants the same thing out of their wine knowledge. And you can do it. You can accommodate all cohorts, equally if you think of them as separate cohorts that have their own needs. So just a little more segmentation and customization around education, I think would go a long way.
When I work with wineries and when they have an educational budget, a lot of it goes towards like the WSET or wine education, and not always does any go to sales education. And so I think just to call it out, like being very specific, you can never do too much education, but for me, you can never do too much sales education. Of course, I mean, that's where I'm coming from, right? But when we're dealing with guests in our tasting room, there's probably a small percentage of those people who are really going to be the cork dork and geek out and want all the details. What they really want are the stories. They really want to have a conversation with people. And so oftentimes it's like a fire hose because that staff member has learned all the information on the wine, all the all the varietals, the the terroir, the vineyards, all the information about the brand. And it's like show up and throw up to be, it's just a whole lot of information where that guest is just going like, whoa. So if you think about if someone comes to wine country and they go to 10 wineries in a weekend, on a long weekend, and they're tasting maybe 6 wines per winery, that's 60 wines. And they're hearing all about the malolactic fermentation. They're hearing it's 8% Riesling. They're hearing it's all these things. That is not gonna, they're not gonna remember that. That's like a deer in the headlights, that when you throw up and show up and throw up like that, it's too much. But if you tell me a story, that's what I'm gonna remember. If you appeal to me in a way that I want to be, have that conversation, that's what I'm going to remember and take away from all those wines and everything. Ben, you'd mentioned a required reading you wished every person had. What was the name of that book?
Building a Story Brand.
Yes.
Yeah,
Don
by Donald Miller. And you're starting to see wineries adopt this more and more. When I go to the website, when I go to the social feeds, do I see myself in this story? Do I see other people like me who look like me enjoying the things that I enjoy? Yep. This is not expensive to implement this. Now the wine brand plays a role in the story, and the role they play is the hero that helps the guide that helps the hero get what they want. So it's a really simple formula. Get the book, please, if you haven't already. And I have no affiliate link to share with you. It's just a great book. Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. The role of the brand is a guide to help the customer get what they want. And if you live that in your messaging on your website and your social media and your email marketing, you're going to really do so much better.
There's another one that might work well too, is if you haven't seen Simon Sinek's TED Talk, start with why. It's a great way to sort of think about your brand, starting with why. As Disney says, everything speaks. So if we are thinking about going to Disneyland or Disney World, we know that everything's in its place. There's no trash. Everybody's in their outfits. Everybody's like ready to go. All of that speaks to that brand. You know what to expect when you go to any of those properties. Same has to be said about our brands. Everything speaks. So whether it's somebody calling you at your winery and you pick up the phone, your website, your social media, your email marketing, what's going on in your tasting room, everything needs to be very similar and seamless so that people feel like they know what to expect from all those different ways of contacting or being interacting with you. So if something is off, it's not going to play well with your brand. And that's the whole basis of having a strong brand and making that accessible to people of all generations.
How'd you know? I loved the do I see me that you said,
Yes.
Ben. So I've been teaching, as I think I mentioned, a class with a friend of mine called DEI Over Wine at New York Kitchen. And I work with a licensed practitioner in DEI, and I think that's really important to do that when I hold those classes. And I'm not going to go too far into DEI. You can come to the panel on Thursday to enjoy that. What I learned from somebody who was in one of those classes is they said that it really does mean a lot to them when they can see themselves in a space. And they referenced even to the degree of the artwork on the walls. And it was something that I kind of set aside in my brain for later, because as you all know, I manage the beverage education for New York Kitchen. We use a lot of stock imagery to somehow, show hands enjoying wine. And I realized, this Black woman realized that every single hand in all those photos were white. So now I do really intentional work to find diverse looking hands even to put in our class listing so that somebody can say, well, I could see myself there. And it's totally subconscious in some ways, right? Like it's
Absolutely.
just, you walk into a room and you see yourself or you don't. And I think that it's really important to be able to do that for people a little bit more. And then going back to the idea of authenticity, sometimes I think just being your most authentic self is the brand. And one thing that I'm noticing about our conversation overall is how much of it is just truly about education. Clearly, the biggest challenge that we have in this market is educating people in a way that they can take it in. So perhaps if we are authentically being ourselves in what we put out, that might be a way, like an avenue to do that. And I'm thinking about some local producers here. I really love sometimes the educational content that Boundary Breaks puts out, for example. It just has to do with the vineyard, and I find myself fascinated by it. So then I can go into a tasting room later and be like, did you know they pruned the grapes during this time or whatever? I didn't know that before, but now I know because of Instagram. And I think that and it wasn't for me, like that wasn't marketed just for me. You know, and I think also that approach takes away the pressure of having to be all things for all people because you're just being yourself. So I would maybe throw that out there as a way to combat the challenge of education, hopefully in a little bit of an easier way.
Mhm. I was also thinking about music, and besides the when you're putting yourself in somewhere where would you feel comfortable there, or things like me, or making it accessible, but everything from the photos to the music, to like the music, if you have music on hold, whatever it is that still reflecting your brand, and is that going to make people feel like, yeah, I feel comfortable, I could buy here, right? Ben, anything to add to that?
Well, I just love this topic that we're on. I was thinking about some of my own experiences, and so some of this is all starting to come together. I remember the first time I visited Han family, the first thing they did was put us into 4x4s and started taking us through the vineyard, telling us about this place, this sense of place. And at a certain point, I found myself like, I could really use a glass of wine. Well, lo and behold, we come around this bend and we go up, and at the top of this hill with a beautiful view of the valley below was a table set with wine. And it just, I'll never forget that. I felt it, I experienced it, I lived it. I didn't need anyone to explain how long the wine had sat in the barrels or how often they served the lees. I was all in at that point. So these experiences can be done by even the smallest budget. But if you make that your goal, to give people an experience, an authentic experience, the rest will just fall into place.
Chris, anything to add before I ask the last question? You good? Okay. So if nothing else, what would you hope our audience walks away with today? What would you like them to be thinking about from this conversation? So I'm going to go back to you, Ben, then Chris, then Maiah.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. And I would say if I could leave with one piece of advice, it's be your authentic self. For example, sustainability is not a marketing message. You either believe in it and live it or you don't. And so whatever it is you're doing, be authentic about it. That's what draws people to you. And the opposite is true. You know, insincerity repels people. I think that's why most people don't like salespeople or anything that smells like salesmanship, because it's just, you know, it stinks. It's not really what people want. So take your brand and your place and your story, and you be you is in an authentic way as possible. Don't try to be someone you're not. Marketing isn't about trying to be someone you're not.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Chris?
I'd just say be intentional. If you want to attract a younger, more diverse audience, and you're going to have to, as we lose the older generations, you know, the first point is you just have to be intentional. You have to reach out and try to do it. You can't just sit back and hope that it will happen. So we've given a lot of ideas of how to go about that today. And some of them might appeal to you or fit what you're trying to do, and others might not. But you just have to figure out which of those ideas you can best implement. But be intentional and make it a goal that you're going to try to attract this audience, if that's what you.
So basically, if you build it, they will come isn't a way to do it. If I make great wine, it'll just sell. We wish, right?
I will buy it if you make great wine, but not every.
Maiah?
I think I would say stay curious. You know, going back to that, like I said, I think the way we've always done things is a cuss word. You know, I think that stops us from maybe taking the next step to sort of change a mind. So maybe if we approach this with as much curiosity as some of our consumers have, it might be a really interesting match to kind of play around in that pool and see how things evolve from there.
Great. So be authentic, be intentional, be curious. I would also recommend taking a step back and looking at your brand and all the aspects of it, from your website to how people answer your phones to your email marketing, and think about like where are areas that you might be able to improve or adjust slightly, and make sure that you're really being authentic and intentional and curious in a way that's going to attract other audiences that you might not be thinking about. But also just think about at the end of the day, our job is, to make money, right? That's a byproduct of what we're here to do. But if we think about it in a way that we can enhance that experience, it's a win-win. All right, I am going to open it up to any questions. Yes. 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 So online people, please ask questions.
Just want to recognize the folks that sent some in.
Yes.
So this might jump back to the beginning because they've been
Perfect.
flowing through. So there was a mention about diversifying the wine discussion or education at New York Kitchen earlier. So that has brought in a diverse new audience. Can you talk specifically about how you might have diversified kind of the wines that you've introduced into the education?
That's a great question. And to be quite honest with you, we need to do a better job. We are really heavy on Finger Lakes wine because of where we are and because of how much we love it. But there's really fantastic New York wine throughout the state. So that's where we have some improvement on our end. But what we have been focused on in some of our classes is sort of highlighting. For example, we had a class called Obscure White Wines of the Finger Lakes, and we'll do another one called Obscure Red Wines of the Finger Lakes. And that one will also have all wines featured by wineries with sustainable practices. And so the idea is to teach people about different grapes that they might not have heard of before. And, a layup for that is a red blend that's coming out of Hunt Country, and they use just a lot of hybrid and vinifera grapes to bring the price point way down, and therefore can bring it to more people. So that's one of the wines that we actually kind of have on constant rotation because it does well in the tasting room, but also because of the conversation that it lets people have afterwards. So right now we're focused on grape diversity, but we need to be more focused on regional diversity within our state as well.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And then just one really good comment, I thought, just kind of going back to what they said in the keynote panel this morning, just was about transparency.
Yes.
And I know that this takes effort as well, but the labeling being very important to certain generations and the transparency of what's in the wine and the viticultural practices and the production. Again, to Ben's point, that's not marketing. It's kind of being authentically who you are, and kind of, can you speak to any trends you're seeing or what you may, I don't know, from different regions, see as examples of that and how it impacts the wineries and sales? That's to everyone.
So one thing I've working with a lot of wineries, being authentic and being transparent. The younger generations definitely want that transparency. They also love causes. They also love to know that, you stand up for certain things. So using that as a marketing / sales tool is great if it's really about who you are. There is one of the more controversial ones in California is a winery called Tank. And it's in California, and it's an old gas station, but they do different wines and they never do the same one again. So it's like a one-off, but they'll do things like self-love, or they'll, and it'll be a certain amount of proceeds goes to mental health, or they'll do a blend and they call it something crazy, or they're very irreverent. And so it appeals to that demographic. I see that working very well for them. But it's not for everyone, and they're okay with that. They say, if you don't like this, that's okay, but this is our line in the sand and this is who we are. So I think it sort of speaks to what you're saying in terms of transparency, and then the causes are huge. Anyone anything else to add on that comment? Jenna? No, gentlemen, anyone?
I have one thing.
Bueller?
I think so. My friend Miriam actually once said that I think accountability is transparency, which I thought was really smart and true. And sort of seeing people put their authentic selves out sometimes means that it's not always clean. Sometimes it's a little messy, and also that's okay. And so I just want to also say that. And then watched a really lively conversation and interview with Shannon Brock last night on Instagram Live that Miriam again interviewed her for. And she said something I thought was interesting. She said that, you know, people come to the Finger Lakes on vacation, right? So they don't necessarily want to be beaten down with your message of, you know, this is all of our sustainable practices from the land to the people. But there's also a lot showing that consumers actually really care and they want to know what people are doing. They want to know what's in their wine. They want to know if you're supporting your local communities. So I think one of the best things to happen to wineries in the Finger Lakes over this weird pandemic was that everybody got new websites. And it does an amazing job of communicating what you stand for. And, you know, then that kind of flows over into what you put on social media. And I think that's a great way to kind of put it out there without, you know, feeling like you're kind of beating people over the head with that information too.
And we'll take one more from the online folks, and then we'll turn it over to Dana and the folks in the audience here. This may be a quick question. Can you touch on natural wine as a way to attract a younger audience? It seems to be a category that's growing within that generation.
Oh, look, we're out of time.
What he said. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, sometimes I feel like it gets an unfair rap, you know, people are curious. So back to that whole stay curious thing, why not? Just give it a shot, see what it tastes like. You know, you might find that somebody really appreciates that and great. There's pet nat everywhere in New York. People are going to love it. So I think maybe you give it a chance, stay curious.
My only pushback is there's so many great wines and I just feel like it's a trend, like a biodynamic or organic or natural or whatever, which is fine. But if you're hanging your whole hat on that, it's just a trend. So I'm thinking that in terms of the focus, not that it's ever going to go away, but that to make sure that you have other things to open their eyes up to and open, but it definitely, we hear that a lot, especially millennials and the adult Gen Zs, that's one of the things that they look for. Gentlemen, anything to add?
No.
No. Okay. We have a question. She's been waiting patiently for the whole time.
It's actually not a question anymore. It's a comment following up on what I teach wine marketing. And so one of the things that, and I do presentations all the time regarding the natural wine, I think the most important thing is to know that natural wine can mean a lot of different things.
Yes.
And a lot of things fall under it. So from a winery's perspective, you could grab onto what piece of natural wine works for your business, whether it be a particular wine practice, or it could be a winemaking practice, or it could be literally sustainability in your winery in terms of what you do. And there's so many levels to it. So when I remember teaching about the concept of natural wine and knowing that it's such a very wide field, and it doesn't need to be a funky sour wine. And so it's about grabbing onto the concept and bringing it to you without, sacrificing your principles of making good wine.
Good point. Yes. Awesome.
Do we have any other questions?
I loved your Gen Z in a box drinking that wine, but many brands would cringe at seeing that. Would you recommend that a more traditional winemaking brand have a separate brand so that they could do more of the funky things and the people drinking out of a box without destroying the traditional brand they worked hard to really build? What would you recommend?
Ben, I'm going to let you start.
Yeah, well, I think like the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I can't see your face, and so please forgive me if I offend you, but I think that there's a little bias here in this question. You already have your own beliefs about what fine wine is and how it should be treated. And my invitation to you is, while there's a lot, you're in good company and there's a lot of that, I think that it's less important to the new and younger generations than it was to our own generation. I think about when I first started learning about wine in the late 70s, there we were just a few years away from the Paris tasting, the judgment in Paris. It was a very different time. And yet I still hold on to a lot of the traditions that I grew up with. And back then everything was France. If you want a quality wine, you went to France. So we all bring our own, my point is this, we all bring our own biases to the world of wine. And I love, my favorite example is this. You don't have to necessarily create a separate brand, although you could, you certainly could. But I love what 14 Hands is doing. And I was at St. Michel when we developed this brand. It's gone through quite a bit of evolution. But the most expensive 14 Hands brands are pretty expensive, and they appeal to a certain person. But those wines are also available, in a handy to-go package, aka a can. So I don't think you have to forfeit your brand image and your brand identity by exploring alternative packages. If it does bother you, then yeah, create a separate brand. There's so many ways to improve cash flow at a winery, and a lot of people miss them because they're just married to this one central image of what our winery should be. And so I don't know if that's useful or not, but I just think that it doesn't have to be a separate brand, but it certainly could be.
I agree with Ben this time. No, that it could be separate or it could be the same. But I go back to, again, Tablas Creek in California, in Paso Robles. They established pretty much Paso Robles, that whole region. So they're very well known. They're very traditional, and they did a box wine, and it is well received, like across the board. And so I think that if you position yourself well with the marketing and stand behind your belief, like, hey, it's great wine, whether it comes in a bottle or a box, guess what? In a box, it's going to stay fresher longer. You know, all the perks that you can say around it, they're killing it. And so, I mean, yes, you could do a separate brand, but there are so many people doing it with really strong, high-end, typical traditional brands that I think there's room for it. That's just my 2 cents.
I think, I don't know enough about your brand, but I personally think that your time and money might be better spent on social media and working with, a partner to create content that can help expand your audience that way. And don't get me wrong, I think if you make delicious wine and you put it in a box, somebody's going to buy it and love it and find it kind of kitschy and fun. But, I'm looking at Oscar actually in front of you, and I do not expect to see you put anything in a can or a box, my friend. Yeah. You never know. Yeah. But I think, during the pandemic, you kind of changed your tasting experience model. And so it, in my mind, kind of opened up the experience to be able to try a lot of different things. And that, I think, can expand your audience in a different way too. So maybe there's, a way to kind of play around with your in-person and online voice without having to add a whole new brand to your portfolio.
Chris?
So I was just going to mention, Valerie, with that Tablas Creek wine too, this is not like a low-end box wine. This is something that retails for, is it like 80 or 90, or do you remember off the top of your head?
No.
So it's, it's putting good wine in a box, and they've been very successful with that model there. So
yeah,
it's not for everyone, but it can be done.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, one more simple analogy. I grew up in an era where if you wanted to go to a nice restaurant, you had to wear a jacket. And if you didn't bring one, they would pull one out of the closet. They wouldn't seat you unless you had a jacket. And so if that's your approach to, and I'm all for building brand equity and charging a lot and raising your prices every year, I think that's great. Just temper it with the idea that it's 2023 and you can go out to a nice restaurant without a dinner jacket. And so what does that look like for the wine world?
We do have one more question here in the audience. I know we're getting down to the wire.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll try and make this quick. I just, I'm interested to challenge the panel about canned wine, because just last week, I think Finger Lakes Wine Alliance had a distributor roundtable where we had representatives from retail, on-premise distributors saying that canned wine, that ship has sailed, nobody's buying it. Stores have removed it in favor of ready-to-drink cocktails. So I'm wondering if it's a disconnect, if there's any disconnect between the marketing, which looks really cool, and then the actual sales of canned wine.
Chris, did you see anything in your analytics when you were looking specifically at ready to drink? Not to put you on the spot, I'm just curious.
No, so in terms of canned wine, and this is not something I've checked on recently, is I see canned wine sales, the information I've seen are still increasing, but the growth rate has certainly slowed. So I don't see it as a ship that sailed. I see it as a durable long-term trend, but we're not going to kind of get the type of growth rates that we got early on in the process going forward. But I'm not seeing any indication that it's a fad and we're reaching end.
And
Ben?
like a lot of categories, there are poor examples entering the category, spoiling it for everyone else. At the end, quality will always carry the day. So the world moves so fast. It would be really easy to dismiss the category, but I don't, as Chris was saying, I think that's a little premature.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question though, Shannon. I appreciate it because I have heard from some people that have put their wine or this was a distillery, but they put product in a can and they cannot get it into stores because they're being told there's already something that exists that's similar. So they're doing their best hawking it themselves and it's really delicious, which is unfortunate. So, you know, you might be right there that there's some concern, but if you're selling it yourself, you know, on your property, then perhaps there's.
Yeah, I'm wondering if because the stories I'm hearing are all about direct to consumer. We don't really work on the trade side. So I'm wondering if there's more opportunity with the direct to consumer side of that than there is necessarily. I don't know what it looks like on the trade side. So it might be something to look at in terms of analytics and seeing there's a story in there somewhere. Thank you.
Just to add to the conversation, I've gotten really big into non-alcoholic beer, and there's a brand called Partake, and they have, you can sign up for a monthly shipment. I don't know if it's worth it, but I like the way it tastes. And I would say I went to Saratoga Racetrack a couple years ago, and you can't bring any product in there that's in glass. And we went to the wine shop that's right next to the racetrack, and they had a whole display of wine and can that you can bring in. So it probably goes back to Ben's point about occasion, and occasion is what really matters as in terms of where you market it.
Yeah, good point.
So sorry to interject there. I'm not part of the panel, but let's give them a round of applause.